Governor Perdue, are there things you'd like to add about what you would recommend for new governors, new legislators?
People out there in general. I don't think it's all going to be driven by the folks who are the policy leaders. You can't put this cat back in the box. It's my favorite phrase. The world has changed, and all of us have to be willing to tear down, as Governor Wise just said, some of the silos that we've built so well in this country and that have served us so well for several centuries. You know, I'm sitting in the state with the first publicly financed university. And so we have such ownership in our institutions, and we're so proud of them. But I was just in Silicon Valley, where I spent a couple of days seeing what's going on there with education and with innovation. When I met with the professors who started Coursera, just because they thought it was a cool idea, from Stanford, and now they have nearly 2 million folks taking courses online. And the next step they know is how they're going to accredit the courses in the context of the things these students are taking online. That's going to change the marketplace. That's the commercialization of learning like we've never seen in the world before. And I believe you've got to tear down some of the barriers. Obviously, the governor's correct. The old Carnegie unit doesn't work necessarily anymore for teachers or for kids or for families. But these learners have the capacity now to leave us if we can't meet their needs. They can go online and go to Khan Academy and get a great chemistry lecture. They can pick up the internet and Google it or do all the other search engines that you might choose, and they can find another way to get content, and they can pay a little bit of money, as is being advertised across the country, if they have federal benefits, and get a discounted rate on a college degree. And so it's there. The world has changed, and for all of us who are tied to the old way of thinking, we just can't allow those kind of barriers to enclose our mind. I think it's exciting. I think you're going to see tremendous movement in how we educate. It's already begun, but we're just at the beginning.
That's great. And to follow that, you gave a few wonderful examples of Coursera and Khan Academy and others. I know that each of you spends a lot of time traveling, a lot of time visiting schools, school districts. Are there some examples that you would suggest people take a look at as they think about what they might do in their own districts or schools?
Let me brag on, let me brag on just one system. Although we have tremendous lighthouses across this state and across this country, we have a superintendent in Mooresville City Schools, Mark Edwards, and Mark was hired by a school board that knew he was an innovator, a change agent. He told the school board members before he took the contract that he was going to make a difference there. And Mark led a digital revolution, K through 12, and today he's seen his academic scores improve just by leaps and bounds. I think the second highest performing school at all levels, school system in North Carolina. His teachers are so excited and so driven by the capacity of a classroom to be flipped or blended or whatever it is that works for them. There's no specialized formula. But a lot of the kids work in teams, they're innovating. They are learning in their school day, especially at the middle school and high school level, what life is going to look like if they're a middle skills worker in the adult work world. And he's got it right. There are other examples that are just as good at a different level. But I know that if any of you out there are looking for best practices, you can contact Governor Wise or the Friday Institute or us, and we can hook you right up with a great place in your own geographic area to go see. It makes you feel good about what's happening in education for teachers, for kids, and actually for our countries.
And if you want one follow-up on that, we actually had a webinar last week with Mark Edwards and Karen Cater, from the U.S. Department of Education, the National Technology Director. And on the Epic Ed website, under the discussions, we have a follow-up with many of the resources that were provided. So if folks want to see more information about Mooresville, it's already on the website. Governor Wise, what are some of the examples you point people to?
Well, Governor already taken the best one, and that's Mooresville, which I kid Superintendent Edwards about. Is for North Carolina, he's created the educational tourism industry as we all trek to Mooresville.
Yeah.
I went to Finland 3 weeks ago to study teaching practices. I go to Mooresville to study technology. But if I could mention some other districts as well that I think are doing good work. From an urban standpoint, Miami-Dade, the Superintendent Cavallo is really transforming, and we're seeing, and he's seeing and creating significant increases in student outcomes. I would point to Floydada, Texas, FLOYDADA. These are all on our website, digitallearningday.org, all one word. But it's at Floydada, it's 86% free and reduced lunch, heavy English language learner that greatly increased college going rates. I would point to Klein, another Texas district, Klein, Klein, as well, Riverside, California. I mean, there are important things to note. And then, again, I would also, in addition to North Carolina, I'd point to some other states that have taken aggressive policy action. South Dakota in certain areas, Utah. New Hampshire is the first state to really institute competency-based advancement and move off of seat time. So there are a lot of exciting areas of practice that are developing.
That's great. All wonderful examples. And we do have a series of webinars with superintendents of a number of districts that will continue on EPIC-Ed. When we asked folks to submit questions in advance, there were a set of questions that raised very important issues about issues of equity and the digital divide and the achievement gap. Some folks are concerned that technology could widen certain gaps rather than close them. What actions do you recommend in terms of technology as addressing equity issues? Some of this is equity of access in terms of broadband access. Some is equity of access at home. Some are using the technology in different ways with different groups of students. So a very broad area of equity, and I'll let you choose which parts of it you'd like to address.
Glenn, I think the whole idea of equity is one that concerns all of us. There are ways to get around the basic inequalities of opportunity in our educational system and the basic inadequacies of some of our systems of connection outside of urban areas. North Carolina's 2 states, Bob. We have a rural area that you would not know when you're sitting in the Triangle today or in Charlotte or Winston. So we have urbanized areas and very, very poor rural areas. So the BTOP that we've done through the school systems, community colleges and universities, have provided the academic connectivity. Every place is connected in North Carolina. We took some federal dollars and leveraged the last mile. We're almost built out statewide, but that doesn't get to your question, Glenn, as to how the kid in his own household might have equity. That's something that we have to work on. We've got some systems here that are providing kids with laptops that they can take home with wireless cards, and they get the parents or the grandparents or whomever to sign a contract with the school, and that's allowable. It's kind of like letting the kid have a textbook. So there are different best practices out there, but I think it's incumbent upon all of us to never let go of this concern until every child in every school building in every place in America has some kind of daytime and nighttime access to content, because that's how they're going to learn in the 21st century.
There's 3 areas, I think, of real equity challenge. Equity by region, and Governor Perdue talked about that in terms of rural versus urban versus suburban. Equity by income level, and equity by race, ethnicity. And often the 3 are joined together, and sometimes there are two elements in them. And so we have to address all of them. Technology is agnostic in the sense of it can improve, it can close the achievement gap, or it can widen it. It's the policies we adopt. And I take the position that it's not, the important thing to stress is technology is what will bring opportunity to all students that perhaps they otherwise wouldn't have. To give you an example from my own experience, high up on a mountaintop in rural West Virginia is Pickens High School with 43 students. I questioned the principal one time, 43 students for K-12. I questioned the principal one time, do you have a good language instructor? And he laughed and said, that's the best Spanish instructor in the country, and she comes in every day at 10 o'clock from San Antonio, fully interactive. And so those students had that access. And so that's into those school districts that are wrestling with, we've got to make sure that just as every child in the past has been guaranteed a textbook, they're guaranteed an internet access device. And the challenge for the state and federal government in the future is going to be, as it look to provide textbooks, what's the requirement? What can it do to help make sure there's a data access plan so that there's equity that takes place within a school in terms of the school and the students having access, broadband and whatnot. And you've done that a good job of addressing that in North Carolina, Governor. And then there's the issue as well as when that child leaves, as the governor says, as a child leaves the school, what kind of equity is there that they're able to be a 24/7 learner? One quick anecdote: I talked to one student who would pull up at night into the parking lot of a coffee shop where there was Wi-Fi, and so that he could do his homework.
I remember when working with the Maine laptop initiative, it was very common for the students to be in the parking lot where they could access the wireless from the schools. Great answers, very thoughtful answers, but it raises one big question, of course. And when we asked people to submit questions in advance, there were two categories the majority of questions fell into. The first was, how do we fund all this wonderful stuff you're talking about? What are your thoughts about where we'll be going in this country and state with funding for digital learning?
For years, I have tried to make sure in every talk that I've done anywhere around the country or the world that when I give a common definition of infrastructure, Glenn, I include technology. I think that technology access and funding is as important to our new economy as is water, sewer, natural gas, and electricity. So I think it's fundamental, and we have to approach this fundamental. In every state in the country, there are water and sewer bonds. There are state and federal financing systems in place that allow partnerships, collaborations in funding, massive funding for roads and bridges and infrastructure. This new technology has got to be part of that formula and part of that discussion. I intend to continue my work on this with Congress next year. But more than that, each of us have to decide what is the role of government and the taxpayer in funding education. I happen to be lucky enough to live in a state that has education as its #1 priority with our people. And we've always been willing to do whatever it takes to make sure that our future workers have the opportunity to have access to a quality basic education as part of our Constitution. And in the 21st century, technology is simply core to a common basic education. And with that, the state has an obligation, an absolutely constitutional obligation, I believe, to help fund and finance technology so that no child is left behind.
To follow on that, I believe also as policymakers look at this, they have to approach it as Governor Perdue says, this isn't a question of if or is this a luxury, this is a necessity. But then I would also suggest looking at funding issues a little differently than perhaps we have in the past. Don't simply layer on. This isn't about simply slapping a netbook on top of the textbook. If you adopt a technology strategy, a digital learning strategy, then what is it that you're going to be offsetting? If you're not buying textbooks, you will be buying digital content, but where are the savings there? If you're able to engage in your teachers in digital communities of practice, what are the savings that you'll be getting on professional development? And for instance, if you are making it possible so that teacher no longer takes home 120 papers to grade at night, but now has an additional hour a day able to put into teaching, now what you've done is you've saved the equivalent of $30 an hour, assuming a $50,000 a year salary for a teacher. You save $30 an hour that it gets put someplace else into actually improving student outcomes. So the overall message is that as you get ready to make these investments, how is it that you redesign your system? You wouldn't, I just think of all the ways we use technology and completely changed our lives. I don't look anymore for a payphone because there aren't very many payphones anymore because nobody expects them because now the cell phone dominates. And so in education, we need to be doing the same thing. But I do want to stress something. It is about how we make the teaching. For 90% of our students in a blended learning environment where technology is being applied within the traditional brick and mortar school, it's about how we improve the ability of teachers to teach and students to learn, and then when we deploy technology, what is it then that we're able to put off to the side that we've been using probably for 100 years?
Thank you. I'm sure I speak for all the educators online that we need the two of you to continue to be out there advocating for the importance of technology, the importance of education, the importance of access for everyone. So I really appreciate those answers. Governor Perdue, you mentioned working with Congress. That raises a question of what is the federal role in supporting digital learning? What would you hope to see, like to see from the federal side?
I really do believe that the federal government has a role to play in education, period. I've not been one to want to throw out the Federal Department of Education. I think they do important work for the people of America and for the future workforce. I think they have to help us continue to embed technology access, and with some of the initiatives that we saw funded in this administration. And I think, as Governor Wise says, they do that through eliminating many of the more traditional choices for the federal funding. I think there has to be a federal discussion about how technology is driving the new economy. This morning I was in a new manufacturing plant where one of the world's leading small solar cells was being manufactured right here in rural North Carolina. And I saw the robotics and the advanced manufacturing and all the technology now that undergirds any manufacturing plant in the world, not just in America. And those workers don't get there from here without some kind of sense of how to use technology. We need to have the federal government, I think, continue to play a leading role in how we go to businesses and ask them to partner with us, because much of the training for workforce transitions occurs in the workplace. And that's another whole area that technology can influence. All in all, this is a shared partnership that we have. When there are big shifts in cultural or social or economic policy in any country, and the federal government is a major player in this effort.
And I believe it's definitely a federal role. One is in research, because almost no state has the capacity or capability to fund the research that's necessary to show the best practice. And since I just mentioned practice, there's something else that the federal government can do. How do you? What I hear so much from state officials is, can you show us where there is a clearinghouse for good practice? And I believe that's part of what Ethic Ed is designed to do here at the Friday Institute, the What Works Clearinghouse from the U.S. Department of Education and other initiatives. The U.S. Department of Education has put forward a National Education Technology Plan that looks to see how it can maximize and assist in working with states and districts. The President has proposed EdDARPA, which is a research, just like the DARPA, the research arm for the military. There would be one for education. Once again, not determining what the outcomes are going to be, but assisting states and districts, particularly in terms of the research that needs to be done around so many different areas of improving education. And I've been struck by how many times I'm now seeing that U.S. Secretary of Education Arne Duncan with the FCC Chairman Felix Jankowski and looking at ways, because the Federal Communications Commission has such an impact on the issues of connectivity. And finally, let me just note, while there won't be any more stimulus packages, I don't think for a while, to the extent that the federal government can provide incentives for states to be able to work towards that equity measure. And I might add that with Title I, this time for Congress, when it reviews the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, it can also review Title I, which was created in 1965, to look to see, which was designed also to promote equity. Are there ways that it can be used in a technology age when it was designed in a textbook age?
Great. All wonderful thoughts. I do want to move on to what was the second most common area of the questions that came in. And we certainly mentioned, and I know you both strongly agree on the critical importance of teachers, but there are a number of questions of how do we reach teachers, how do we provide the professional development, how do we really prepare teachers from the pre-service and the in-service levels for all of these changes we're talking about in the schools and teaching and learning.
I think I should refer to the former teacher and doctor in education.
Those degrees are mighty old, Ron. You know, those of you in the audience didn't have the luxury. We had an hour with Dr. Kleiman and the Friday leaders here who focus a whole lot, not just on digital policy and outreach and research and development. They do some really applied research and some just absolutely marvelous staff development and content development. And as I listen to them, I think that the best practices are there. We just have to develop a catalog, if you will, an e-site that tells people where they can go. There is no reason that staff development can't be driven in large part through virtual opportunities. That's happening here. We heard about that. And so I think that we all realize, and as a former teacher, I can tell you how I feel. Nobody's trying to replace me and the work I do as a teacher, because that would be impossible. But people are allowing me to access resources that are going to make me a much better teacher, and as Governor Wise pointed out, perhaps free up some of my time that has been just hogged by the demands of the paperwork of teaching, and allow me to use technology to accelerate the quality of my teaching rather than doing the busy work. And I believe that's there for teachers, and all of that is already in place. We all just have to push back and decide we're going to take advantage of it.
I'm excited about technology because other teachers have told me the same thing, that as it can do so much for students and student learning, so it can do for teachers and teacher learning, and the ability digitally to create communities of practice in certain areas, whether it's within the school, across the school lines, within the district, or across district and state lines. Also, we're going to be faced in this country with significant challenges. Roughly 10% of our teachers retire each year, and so we're going to have this influx into the system, which we're going to need. These teachers, and particularly the younger teachers, will come in wired and familiar with technology, but they won't come in necessarily with the ability to use that for teaching. And so there has to be a commitment in our schools of teacher education and our certification processes towards making sure that technology is a major part of the teaching environment.
Great. Let's go on and talk about school and district leaders. We all know that they're critical to the change process. In a number of schools, we hear from teachers that they would like to do things that they're not getting sufficient support for. How do we retool the school and district leaders to be ready for the digital transformation of education?
If I were a school or district leader, I think I'd be, well, I know I would be. They're looking at they're looking at such challenges that they're already facing, and I've ticked off a number of them in terms of, let me rephrase that, I haven't ticked off the school officials, I've ticked off the challenges in terms of implementing the Common Core, constrained budgets, and so on. So what is it that changes, and they know that they can't get there from here, so what is it that changes it? And that's why the importance of someone like Dr. Edwards, Mark Edwards in Mooresville, or other, Gilbert Trevino, or Superintendent Cavallo, or others, the importance of that strong leader. If you know that you can't make the progress you want, then you have to change. And this also applies, I think, to district school board leaders, state board of education members, and so on. And so it's recognizing, as Governor Perdue has already said, is what you do in your own life, what is it that needs to, why isn't that being translated and transferred to the education process? So if I were a school leader, I would, one, be coming to grips with that, and most of them are. Number two is looking for the leaders within your school or within your system. You mentioned the teachers. There are a lot of teachers that actually are leaders in practice, and they can be role models for other teachers as well as help guide the discussion and strategy. And then I'd also be looking for resources, whether through their own organizations or, as I say, through this Project 24, where we would be putting forward a strategy template that every school leader can go through in order to do a self-assessment of where they are in educational technology, and then what it is they need to do to truly embrace and employ a digital learning strategy.
None of this will happen in terms of a teacher or a student's ability to use technology without the state, the federal, and the district level leaders being really engaged in why we have to use precious dollars to finance this kind of investment. I have great optimism about the fact that folks around the world understand that the world has changed. It is no longer flat, nor is it any longer driven by yesterday's automobile engine. Technology drives everything that we do. And any district elected superintendent or school board member who doesn't have a child or a grandchild and doesn't see the import of technology on those children's lives don't pay attention to what's going on. So I think when they come to the school board meetings or when they come to the Board of Governors meeting or the Board of Trustees for a university, this has to be as basic to their discussions as how are they going to finance professors' salaries or teachers' salaries. This is core. This is important as the old textbook fund was, and there just has to be some shifting and realignment of priorities. But I have never ever sold my leaders at the local level or the state level short. They know what's happening and they know what they're going to need to do, and they'll do it if we can give them a thoughtful, goal-centric, with results deliverable and measurable plan that allows them to make wise choices.